Namaste and welcome to another episode of the Vichaar Manthan podcast. My name is Sumit Sharma and it's my great honour to be hosting this project. A VM project looking to explore dharmic concepts, commentaries, issues, challenges facing modern day society. If you have agreed or disagreed or have any comments or suggestions with the topic of this podcast, I will be very interested to hear from you. You can email me on podcast@vichaarmanthan.org. You can see all of the other VM projects on our website, vichaarmanthan.org. There are book clubs, there's the Sustainable Narratives Conference, and many VMs and firesides happening almost weekly, all run by a volunteer group. It's amazing. We live in a world where we think we are free, where we think we can almost say what we like and do as we please. We have these freedoms given to us, and sometimes we think there are God-given rights, or it's my right to be able to say this or do that. And in some parts of the West, I think I'll agree. Other parts of the world, maybe not so sure. But hey, I'm no expert. It's my honour to bring back Dr. Sachin Nandha onto the podcast. You may remember him from episode 1, Exploring Dharma. Sachin did his PhD in philosophy at Nottingham, has studied in Oxford, is an ex-private equity partner, and is now currently working full-time for the Charitable Earth Foundation. I think we have much to learn, and he tells me that liberty and freedom are topics that he is most passionate about. So much so that he would have worshipped the deity of liberty. Sachin, welcome back to the VM podcast.
It's a pleasure to be back, Sumitji. Really good.
Tell me more about this worshipping of the deity. What are you talking about?
It was just a flippant comment, really, where I was suggesting that, had I lived in classical times, our classical ancestors had a habit of personifying forces, ideas that shaped their environment, shaped their lives, right? That they were powerful forces that they could harness or maybe not harness. Maybe they understood, maybe they didn't understand. But they would personify them, and they would learn to respect them and learn to really study them. And whenever a force or an idea was personified like that, it became a deity. So my suggestion is that if I was living in the classical age, for me, liberty and freedom would become a deity that I would probably worship. By worshipping, I mean it's the force that I connect with the most.
Is that similar to how we would worship, like, God of sun, God of wind, God of water? Those seem quite sort of elementary.
Yeah.
Biological.
So yes, quite right. So yeah, in the same way that we knew, or our ancestors figured out very quickly that without the sun we all die, right? And therefore we need to harness the sun in very clever ways. We need to harness rainfall in very clever ways. We all feared thunder, right? Hence every ancient culture had a terrible god of thunder, right? We had Indra. In the same way, I'm just suggesting that actually freedom and liberty is a force to be reckoned with, and it's a real goddess for us. It really helps us flourish and helps us develop ourselves, and we lose freedom or liberty at our own peril.
That's an interesting point you make there. I guess we'll have to dive a little bit deeper into that. So we're here today to discuss liberty and freedom. And as I said in the start, these sometimes we believe are our rights. Is that something you can comment on? Is it our right to liberty, to freedom?
If you look at history, most of our past has been illiberal, right? Most human beings across most of time, mostly across this planet, has not been free.
Quite barbaric.
It's been authoritarian. It's been run by kings and queens that are often despotic. It's been authoritarian to the point where we've enslaved millions and millions of people since time began. We're not talking about just the European slave trade. We're talking about the Arab slave trade. We're talking about the Chinese slave trade. Slavery has been part parcel of humankind for a very, very long time. And I think we forget that the freedom and liberty we enjoy today is a very modern thing. It's a very new thing. And we've just in the vast span of human history, we've just managed to get hold of it. And if we're not careful, we might lose it.
I see signs of that already. There are things you can't say or do. Even here, living in the West, in Great Britain, I think we have a lot of freedoms that other parts of the world don't have. But there are still those sort of guidelines and barriers of things you don't mention at work and you don't talk about in particular groups. So it's an interesting concept.
It's a kind of like a, it's a creep effect, right? So we had to fight. We meaning, our forebears before us had to fight very hard to enshrine that we live in a free, we live with a certain amount of freedom and we live in a liberal society. And as they fought through treasure and blood for this, there's an argument to be said that we could be sleepwalking or creeping towards having that liberty being corroded away from our lives, right? We might be losing our sense of liberty, our sense of freedom, and our value for it if we're not careful. So it's important, I think, that we discuss and we are able to openly, without fear, discuss some of these pertinent topics. And I'm glad Vichaar Manthan's doing it.
Excellent. Let's get into some of these. Let's state our terms, right? Let's get some definitions across. So we're talking about liberty, freedom, flourishing, these kind of things. So let's go back to the basics. Liberty, right? What does that mean?
Yeah. So and I'm so glad you started at this particular point, right, where we just get the definitions right. It's kind of practicing linguistic hygiene, right? So if we get our language right, hopefully the rest of it will become clearer. Often people use liberty and freedom as if they're synonyms. And to some degree, maybe.
So then, they're not the same thing.
They're not the same thing, though. So freedom is about the individual. Liberty is often at a societal level. So, for example, if I start with liberty, which is the societal, liberty is about being free within a society, right? And I'm free from what? I'm free from oppressive restrictions imposed by some authority or some king or some dictator on the way I want to live, and to the point where even the kind of political views I hold, they want to control those things. So liberty is effectively talking about your freedom in the society to think and to do as you please.
That's been challenged
Very much.
a lot.
And this is my point about maybe we are now sleepwalking into having much of our liberty being curbed from us, right? And in fact, thought police, right? Where you're not even allowed to think certain words, say certain things. You can get, what's it called? Deplatformed very quickly these days, right? And so on and so forth. Whereas freedom, you see, freedom exists on the individual level. That's for you and I personally. And freedom is effectively my own ability to think and act in the world as I see fit.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That's freedom.
Do as I please.
Do as I please, right?
Say what I want.
And think as I please. Right? Think as I want. Right? So
hold on. Are you suggesting that people don't or can't think for themselves anymore?
I think what I would start with is not that people can't think for themselves anymore, but actually most of us, most of the time, I'll include myself in that, very rarely think for ourselves. In fact, we are mostly thinking things within a very tight framework of social conditioning and our genetic makeup, effectively, our biochemistries, effectively. Between these two things, we are highly curbed in how we think, what we think. And often what we think is often implanted by our social groups, our customs, our society.
TV adverts.
Or the TV adverts. So very rarely I find that we have an original thought, a true thought that is authentically mine. And it's very hard to distinguish those thoughts from all the other stream of thoughts that I have. I mean, Sumi, you tell me, right, how many adverts you must see in a day.
I'm sick of them. I hate adverts.
Right?
I feel like I'm being sold to or fed a lie all the time. But I see your point. There are people out there and they'll watch, that shiny red car. Oh, I need a shiny red car. And it's so subtle. And I think these marketing schemes and companies have figured it out over the years how to affect the human psyche. And there's some great Black Mirror episodes on some of these, which we'll have to sit down and watch.
I will have to, because I've not seen hardly any of them, right? But to your point about the red cars and things, what marketeers and PR companies have figured out is how to tap in to our subconscious, unconscious mind, right? Our inner yearnings, our inner fears, our inner pangs, and then they sell products to us through that. Now, am I free, right, to, for example, take a chocolate bar, okay? I am walking down the street, and all of a sudden I have an urge, or I reflexively, but I see a Kit Kat and I have an yearning, an urge to pick it up and just buy it. It's like almost like a subconscious, unconscious thought, almost like a reflex that I had, right? A lot of people go through this.
Yeah.
Now, where did that conditioning come from? There's no way I was born with that, right? Now, there's something to be said that I have a biochemistry as a human being that I want sugar and salts, right?
Sure,
and I love fats. Chocolate has all of it, so I'm naturally biochemically inclined to enjoy chocolates, okay?
And that morning you might have seen an advert on TV.
And that morning I may have seen an advert on TV, but also I've bought a Kit Kat from that shop so many times now, it's ingrained in my character.
It's part of your nature.
It's just part of my nature, is to unconsciously go and buy it. Now, to what degree have I been free to make that conscious decision? And to what degree is it even conscious for me to pick up that Kit Kat and say, yes, I am doing this out of my own free will? My argument is that I think it's very hazy.
On the surface, okay, let's backtrack a little bit. So the question here is, how free are you to have that chocolate? Okay, so on the surface, I think very free. It's your choice. You want the chocolate, you go have it. But I don't think you're asking a little bit deeper than that. You're asking, what did it take for me to want that? Am I free from the want?
Correct.
Not even the actual chocolate.
Correct. Absolutely right. So here we can clearly differentiate liberty and freedom. So because we live in a liberal society, you are absolutely free to go and buy any chocolate you like.
So no one's forcing you to.
And no one's forcing you to eat the chocolate. It's up to you. However, freedom is your own personal free will, right? To do as you please, to think as you please. My argument is, are you that free?
So what? Are you saying you've been programmed to want that chocolate?
In some sense, yes, I am saying that. That's exactly what I'm saying. That actually we are being conditioned by custom, by tradition, by society. In fact, Sumitji, I would argue that we usually call this civilization, right? To be civilized is to follow a set of norms, a set of conditions.
It's a scary thought, right? And let's take chocolate out of the equation. Let's talk about your views on, I don't know, slavery or war or gender equality or whatever it might be. Your view, I think you're suggesting, is no longer yours, or you're not necessarily free anymore to make those decisions.
You see, yeah. Let's untangle that, right? So what I'm suggesting is you are absolutely free to make the decision, right? Because that's liberty. You're in a liberal society, at least here in the UK, to a greater extent than, say, China. However, my initial argument to you is that notion of freedom, that I have been free to decide as I please, my argument is that most of our thinking is not out of free consciousness. It's not out of free will. It is out of conditioning, custom, tradition, religion, effectively memes that we have not truly reflected on, memes that I have not truly rationalized, right? Ideas that I have not truly understood. But I adopt them and I pretend as if they are my ideas.
Can you give me an example?
Yeah, so I'll give you an example both ways. So today, it would be quite abhorrent to anybody listening to this podcast to have a slave.
Sure.
Right? I mean, that's clear cut. But in the 17th century, in the same country, right, in its heyday, by the way, right, it was absolutely normal, absolutely common sense to own slaves. In fact, most people in the UK, their pensions were dependent on owning slaves in the Caribbean, right? Millions of people were enslaved in order to fund pension pots, right, for people in the West to retire on. Now, it was so normal, so normalized, Now, what happened between a human being in the 1700s and a human being today in 2021, right? 2022 even, I should say, right? So what's the difference? Well, our biochemistries haven't changed. We've not evolved that much that all of a sudden, my ancestors in the 1750s couldn't figure out that slavery was bad. It was the culture, it was custom, it was, and very few people think. Very few people actually digest thoughts and really rationalize thoughts and really churn ideas before saying, yes, I have now freely understood this idea and I'm going to exercise my liberty and act accordingly to how I please. I find that often most people in most societies generally, more often than not, just pursue custom, just pursue tradition.
Just do the norm.
Just do the fashionable thing. Because they want to fit in.
That's interesting. Fashion.
Yeah, I mean, look at fashion, right? We are all told that let's all be unique. Yet, all of us go and buy most of our clothes from high street shops, which are made in the dozens, in the millions of pieces, right? So how unique is really any of us, right? Yet, fashion will tell you every 6 months, every 3 months that it changes.
It's like color of the season or this particular fabric is in season. That's so strange, right? You're talking about you're not even free from the color palette that, I don't know, Prada, Gucci.
So, what car do you drive?
I have a nice BMW.
You have a nice BMW, not just a BMW, a nice BMW.
It's the ultimate driving machine.
It's the ultimate driving machine, absolutely. Now, to what extent do you think you were free? So you definitely had the liberty to buy the car that you wanted.
Sure.
Yeah, there was no restriction on you. As long as you could afford it, you could buy any car you want. What made you truly go and buy a BMW? Now, of course, you may have been absolutely free. You churned rationally, reasonably, scientifically all of the options to you, and you decided on BMW. Yeah. Is that what happened? Or do you think brand, PR, marketing, fame, fashion may have?
A few of those things probably had some implications on my thought, but I think I'm quite aware of those. My father had a BMW. There's probably some notions in there of my link to him. I've been aware of German engineering. I've been to one German factory, and that was a BMW factory. So yeah, there's probably quite a lot in there.
Would you buy a Mercedes?
No.
So it's really fascinating, isn't it? It's fascinating when we begin to peel back, and I include myself in this, right? I peel back most of my thoughts, and I discover that very few thoughts are truly mine. Actually, most of my thoughts, I'm not saying that's bad, by the way. I'm not making a moral judgment here. So our listeners shouldn't be confused. I'm not making a moral judgment at all. So there's no good or bad in this. I'm not suggesting that. What I'm suggesting is the matter of fact that very few of our thoughts are truly rationalized, truly reasoned. They're not really ours, right?
This is quite dangerous, though. You're almost... Someone could really start to question their own identity in this process.
And so they should.
Fair enough, actually. That's not a bad point. You mentioned earlier biology about the chocolate bar, right? And just sort of your sugar cravings and those kind of things. Can we expand on that? So, if your body craved the sugar, then you weren't free to decide if you wanted the chocolate? Your body decided it for you?
Well, now we get into the issue of consciousness and who am I question, right? So we don't want to go down that rabbit hole, right? But if we just take that basic concept of the chocolate bar, my body is biochemically designed to yearn certain things.
But okay.
And it's not rational. It's not a rational thing that my body is doing to me.
So, okay, if you were allergic to that chocolate,
then my body won't yearn it because my body has bad reactions to it, right?
But you could still eat the chocolate.
Yes.
You have that free will.
Indeed. But do you really? So you ask anybody who's got a nut allergy how confident they are in eating a nut. Will they exercise their freedom in eating a nut? They'll look at you squarely and go, I'm not foolish, right? I'm not crazy. I'm not going to risk death.
You're right. So you're sacrificing this free will for another free will.
Or freedom.
In this case, it's life or chocolate bar.
Yeah.
And sort of, okay, obviously
Right?
you wouldn't sacrifice.
So you won't do it. But my point is that often our bodies are designed in it's just evolved, right? I mean, I'm not a neurologist or nor am I a biologist, but what I do know is that our bodies are not rational things in themselves biochemically, right? It craves certain things. It has certain pangs. It has certain now to what degree am I free? To what degree have I surpassed my own bodily yearnings?
Yeah, that's quite simple. If you wanted to be healthy, you would eat all the right foods.
And how many of us can achieve that?
Well, no, of course.
Exactly, right? All of us know what we should do. How many of us can do it? Very, very few. And it's very hard. We call that discipline, right?
Yeah.
And discipline is incredibly hard, right? Willpower. I mean, there are thousands of, self-help books on this stuff. Why? Because our bodies are so powerful, right? So what degree then have I got freedom? To what degree have I got freedom?
Not just that, even mentally, you'll start convincing yourself, oh, I'll have this one chocolate bar, I'll start my diet tomorrow.
Yeah.
So it's that constant battle between sort of mental, physical.
I mean, this is how even, things like alcohol, right? Things like overspending or gambling, all these sorts of things triggers in this subtle way. It's often a creep effect. No one has an intention to become an alcoholic, right? Nobody has an intention to gamble. But you creep. You creep into that direction. So the way in which sort of I often think about it is if that's I may well have liberty. And let's suppose I've got 100. Imagine there's a spectrum. 0 meaning I've got no liberty. My society won't even allow me to think in a particular way. So let's pretend that's the 1984 sort of George Orwellian sort of Orwellian society. 100 is where I'm absolutely free to do what the hell I want. Nobody can stop me from doing anything, right?
That's also dangerous.
Right, correct. But let's suppose that's the spectrum, right? And let's suppose I'm on the 100. I may be able to exercise my liberty, but if I don't have freedom, personal freedom, then what good is that liberty? So everything starts with your sense of personhood, and that's why in the dharmic tradition, Sumit, I heard your several podcasts with the Acharya Krishnaji, Siddharth Krishnaji, right? And the emphasis he gave, and you guys were talking about, was in some sense transcending yourself and liberating yourself from yourself. One of those yourself bit is the body. How do you liberate yourself from the body? So all of our Hindu traditions are obsessed with the idea of transcending the limitations of your body. Because we want freedom. We crave freedom. Freedom is something that we are obsessed with.
It's that, I know what you're talking about, those yogic principles of detachment from worldly pleasures, I guess that's where discipline comes in. Your body wants the chocolate, but your mind needs to be a little sharper and say, well, you can want it, but for our greater good, for the flourishing of this mind, body, soul connection, whatever you want to call it, we won't have that chocolate bar today. We'll go and do 10 press-ups instead. And
Krishnamurti said something really interesting. He said, when you truly know something, so when you truly have knowledge about something, your behavior will be completely or almost completely in sync with that which you know.
Right.
Right? That was his statement. So your behavior will be in complete sync with that which you know. Now, the fact that I can't resist a chocolate bar, that's me personally, then it shows you that I have information about chocolates and information about my body and how maybe I shouldn't eat so many chocolates, but I don't have knowledge of it. Because the moment I truly have digested reasonably, rationally, that chocolates are to be limited, enjoyed but limited, then this notion of, when I desire it, would just disappear. That's the Krishnamurti's perspective.
Sure. And I think what you're talking about there is balance. Everything in balance. And so even the spectrum you painted, 0 to 100, even the person that's totally free, totally liberal, they are no longer in touch with whatever society or institution they belong to. So that's also dangerous too.
Correct, absolutely right. Because we want to live together as human beings. We don't want to live in caves on our own in the forest, or at least most of us don't, right? It means that we want to exercise liberty only to the degree that I am safe and the other person is safe, right? Because so the question becomes is, why should, Isaiah Berlin said this, why should anyone obey anyone else? Right? That's the ultimate question. Why should anyone obey anyone else when it comes to liberty?
Because they know more than you?
Because they might know more than you, or because you recognize that my liberty should only go so far so that I flourish without harming anyone else or anything else.
Sure.
So it's the harm principle that kicks in at this.
Yeah, that's fine. I should be able to do as I want, so long as it doesn't hurt anyone else.
Or harm another. Absolutely. We call that ahimsa, right? So these are principles upon which societies are built upon, right? And, we have a particular notion of liberty and freedom in this country.
So that's where liberty comes in, right? So we were saying earlier, freedom is an individual thing. Your freedom to think, your freedom to walk, talk, whatever you want to do. And liberty is its manifestation in the structure of society in which we live. And what I mean by structure of society is things like law, money, governance, institutions, the way society is built up to allow you to do that. So let's see if I can think of an example of the way we have liberty here in the West compared to, say, somewhere in China. Now they have China's internet is locked down, the great firewall of China, so to speak. And so the government of China believe or have curated a list of websites that its residents cannot access. So their liberty is somewhat curbed in that instance.
Correct. This podcast can never be heard in China.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Right? Especially now after what you just said. Right? Now, that is a clear demonstration of how liberty can be.
So even if that Chinese resident that wants, I don't know what I'm saying.
Has the freedom
to listen.
They can't exercise
the freedom.
They can't exercise it. So we need freedom and then we need liberty.
Let's do another example. Somewhere in the West here of how freedom and liberty are paired up.
Okay, so I have really, and this is an absolute sort of thought, right? So take a thought where I have come to know that thought X is absolutely correct, right? But this thought X runs against the grain of my society.
Ooh.
Right? And this X thought will harm, let's just say, the economy in some way. Right? But I know that X to be correct. It's the right thing. It's a truthful thing. My society will effectively not give me the liberty to express that X. Now, in the West, the way that happens is you get deplatformed, right? You get shut down by PR agencies. You get told that you're, right? You are...
This is like when Twitter banned Donald Trump.
Correct. That is an illiberal exercise done by Twitter, no matter what you say. Even if Trump is the worst human being alive, yeah? And let's just assume, for the sake of this conversation, he is conclusively the worst human being alive. In a liberal society,
he should still be able to speak.
He should be allowed to speak.
It's so interesting, right? And he was the United States of America president at the time. So the president of the free world,
correct,
was taken off of Twitter. Now, who is Twitter to make that decision?
Who is Twitter? Twitter is a PLC or a company that is run by shareholders who has only one major alliance, one major goal, which is to give shareholder value.
Right.
That is what Twitter is about. It's about creating shareholder value. Right? So,
to take the business side out of it, this is a platform, I don't know what their tagline is, but you can tweet what you like. You can speak what you like.
But I can't. So, for example, I think it was you that was explaining to me what shadow
banning.
Shadow banning is.
Oh, you see this on Instagram a lot. If you're not talking about what they want you to talk about, or rather you're talking against it. Oh, look, we're in COVID times, right? There are platforms out there, if you talk about COVID, denying COVID or calling it a hoax, and there's lots of trains of thought out there. But there are certain places online where your podcast or your Instagram post or your tweet won't make it to the public. It won't be widely available, even to your own followers. Shadow banning.
These are illiberal ideas.
This is dangerous. This is not a society that is flourishing. I don't know.
I think this is a society which has forgotten, or we are forgetting, the power and importance of freedom and liberty. And therefore, we are allowing corporations, governments, central banks to under the guise of security, which is we will keep you safe, right? We will take your freedom away from you, or a little bit of your freedom away from you. We'll take a little bit of your liberty away from you. But we'll keep you safe, I promise.
It's that creep.
It's the creep.
A little bit at a time.
Yeah, it's the creep. I don't know if anybody, the listeners would have seen Star Wars, the first Star Wars, right? Yeah. In the first Star Wars, there's a sign where the Emperor, who is actually a senator, initially he's a senator, part of the intergalactic parliament, and he says that there are terrorists attacking us everywhere, and we need to protect ourselves from the terrorists. Therefore, I declare that we need emergency powers to protect ourselves. And all the other senators applauded him in taking their liberty away from them. Wow. So they clapped their way into becoming an illiberal dictatorship, or despotic, and that's what the Star Wars is about. And I think that was a demonstration of how sometimes we can sleepwalk into giving our freedom away.
So we will trade our liberty for security.
Always. Always. This is the dark side of humanity, where we are so frightened of the unknown. We are so easily cajoled that we were happy to give away what we have in order for this, whether it's real or false threat, but we want to be protected from it.
And that I think that's where the danger is. So you could declare an emergency and own the narrative. So you can convince people that this is what's going on. Let's just think of an example, right? Aliens have landed in London, right? So to protect you all, we're turning off mobile phones.
Correct. I mean, that would be quite a hilarious thing, but yes, absolutely right. Yeah.
So no, what's the end result there? I now no longer have use of my mobile. All the mobile networks are dead. So I have lost
your liberty.
My liberty.
Not your freedom, but your liberty. And of course, without liberty, what good is your freedom? Right? And what good is your liberty without freedom? So you need both hand in hand. Freedom is your individual thing, remember? And liberty is a societal thing.
Yeah, but the point I was trying to make is I know not of the aliens. I haven't seen them. I don't know if they're true. But this has been declared by the powers that be.
Yeah. But you see, we live in a society where there is a well of trust. Yep.
Yeah.
I cannot expect it to know and be an expert on everything.
Sure.
Right? So I naturally look towards institutions that I trust because they are the experts in particular XYZ.
You rely on the legal system.
I rely on doctors and the medical profession to tell me about COVID. Right? And if enough doctors and if enough scientists tell me categorically that, look, this is dangerous, you need to take the vaccine, I'm more likely than not to take the vaccine. Right?
Okay. So you're quite liberal in that sense.
Correct.
And you will rely upon professionals around you to make that opinion. I know of lots of people that haven't taken the vaccine. They believe it's an infringement on their personal freedoms. It's up to them whether they take the vaccine or not.
Correct. It is totally up to them.
But their liberty is slowly being taken away. You can't go to a restaurant unless you're double jabbed. You can't go to the theatre unless you can prove XYZ.
Correct. And what's happening is their liberty is being taken away because the powers that be are saying that we cannot allow you to exercise your freedom right now because your freedom harms another.
Right.
And because your freedom harms another, we're going to have to restrict your freedom, I'm afraid.
There's not much you can do about that.
Exactly.
You can stand by your freedom. I'm not taking a vaccine. I don't believe it's true. It's not safe. XYZ. Look, I'm no scientist. I'm no politician. I'm no doctor. I don't know. But what I think we're saying here is you can have those freedoms, But if the rest of society doesn't allow you to exercise your freedom, aka liberty in this scenario, then what good is it?
Exactly. And that's why one of the key things that Dharma tells us is that knowledge, the idea of Saraswati, the deity of knowledge, is so central to our culture that without knowing, without having the ability to discriminate, what we call vivek, until we develop vivek in every single human being to discriminate between right and wrong, truth and falsehood, facts and opinions, until we have that basic faculty, and of course in a world of internet, in a world of deep fakes, in a world of cloak and daggers, right, and VR and AR, it's getting harder and harder to have that vivek to discriminate between what is the case and what is not the case, right?
That's a very good point.
So
And deep, but I don't want to get into that just yet because you've given me a thought there. So the ability to discriminate, I think you're talking about critical thinking, rational
yes, that's right.
reasoning, actual character, allowing you to discern between things that are good, bad, right, wrong, etc., etc. Okay, well, where does that all come from? How does one build Vivek? How does one build that ability to figure out truth from untruth?
Yeah, and I think this is where the crux of libertarians and liberty and freedom all lies, right? It is to do with our capability, right? And you may have heard me say and rabbit on in the previous podcast, but capability is built out of, one's character and one's skills, right? So the character, literally meaning the engraved mark, right, comes out of my habitual behavior patterns, habitual behavior, like the Kit Kat thing and
things you've grown up with and sort of
yeah,
just
but
the
it's
way you
habitual
are.
to me, right? I do things without really thinking. That's my character. And under pressure, how do I behave? Under fear, how do I behave? In that quick, my initial response, how do I behave? That is my character, right? My skills is my physical sort of, my ability, my skill to do something. Now, our education system is completely geared towards skilling me up to serve my economy,
Yeah.
right? But who's developing my character? And if I don't have character, I don't really have capability. My argument that I would like to pose, Sumit, on your podcast, is that we live now in a society where we have incredible skills, incredible information, right? But we lack knowledge, we lack wisdom, and we lack character. And because we lack character, we give away our freedom and our liberty to powerful forces in order to seek security, whether real or perceived, right? Because we lack character, because we lack the wisdom, because we've not been developing character. As a society, we've forgotten all about character. We've forgotten all about the idea of wisdom. Who thinks about wisdom anymore?
You have a woke culture and you'll retweet that famous quote by that famous philosopher because it touched something within you. Thinks, yeah, that's great. Da 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 da. But when you are in the position of hardship or struggle or somewhere where in your relationship something's broken down, how are you going to face the test of time? How are you going to face that hurdle? What are you going to do? And that's the bit that requires character. And I think, at least what I've seen, people are now, you can't depend on your own experiences and willpower to get you through. You need a self-help book, or you need that meditation class for $2.99 a month. Da, 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 da.
Correct. And I think humanity, at least here in the developed West and in our liberal democracies, and we haven't even talked about democracy yet, but we are searching for ways in order to enhance our character. Hence the craze behind yoga, the craze behind mindfulness, right? These are clear signs that individuals are recognizing at some conscious level that, wow, I'm really lopsided and I'm struggling to cope with life. I'm struggling to cope with my own emotions.
That's a lot of people these days.
Correct. And I think it's because the wider society has completely developed our intelligence, our skill.
We just don't know how to use it.
We don't know how to use it. We don't know how to use Vivek, right? and therefore we cannot be dharmic, right? We cannot align ourselves to what is, and that's why we suffer, and then we don't know how to deal with our sufferings.
And these sufferings can also be quite subtle, like, oh man, it's like being distracted. You have a task at hand, you know, you're at work or you're online or you're doing something, and you're distracted by whatever, I don't know, social media, sports results, stock market, cryptos. You're distracted. My point here is you're distracted. And so you lack character, and in this particular instance, discipline, to stay focused on your task.
Yes, absolutely. And if you remember that there was a wonderful artwork by Banksy, right? Where there's a couple that are embracing each other.
And they're staring at their phones.
And they're staring at their phones. Everybody may have seen that, right?
Yeah.
That is this epitome of our society, right? Where
There's now a feature in your phone that will remind you to look up if you're walking down the street.
So tell me, how free are we? Where your phone has to tell you to look up tells you how free you are. If you are the kind of person that cannot put the phone down at night and you're constantly looking at YouTube videos, you have to question your freedom.
It's addictive.
It's addictive.
And not just like YouTube, but
anything, right?
There's a thing now, I forgot what it's called, but it's how many miles have you scrolled? You know, how active are our thumbs? We're reprogramming our motor neurons, you know, the thumb and eye coordination, just to constantly scroll. It's a never-ending task.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with you, Sumitji. And absolutely. And we have to say something about the nature of democracy in this, right? Democracy was meant to protect our liberty and our freedom, right? But it sometimes feels like, to me, that the very opposite is happening. That we are somehow sleepwalking into losing our sense of who we are, right? And what we really want in life. And instead we're being cajoled by our bodily senses or by marketing forces or by fear, right? Into behaving in quite, I think, interesting ways, right?
So, okay, let's figure something out here. Well, okay, I've grown up at least to understand that democracy is the best way. It's the right way. You know, we live in a democratic society. There are large democracies out there. Where does that come from? Why is democracy such a game changer?
Well, I think, look, this is my view on this. And I think Winston Churchill says it best, right? Democracy is the least of all the evils.
Okay.
It is not so great, right? And we've known it's not so great for a very long time, right? That the classical Greek society knew it, the classical Indian society knew it, that democracy has severe limitations. However, it's the best of all the evils, right? It's the best story in town. We haven't got a better story, but we know it's got problems.
So, yeah. So the best we have it. We have it the best right now, right?
We've got a liberal democracy in a world of plenty.
And it works.
And yet, we are so miserable sometimes, suffering sometimes.
Yeah.
And there is an argument to be said that we are less free. We may have liberty, but we are less free than we ever used to be. As you mentioned the phones, as you mentioned the chocolates, as you mentioned the cars, right? How free are we?
I imagine this is quite challenging for some of the listeners we have. At least, you know, my mind's doing mental gymnastics about, am I free? I mean, you know, I picked that car. Was I free to make that decision?
And I think these are really worthwhile questions that every single listener should have. And do you know why? Because when you can exercise these types of questions in your mind and you can give yourself time to think about these things, you are truly free. Sure. Because you are now asking really meaningful questions that has the power to liberate you from your own conditioning.
Yeah, from your own thinking. Right? This is interesting, you know. So when a notion like this comes up, I often think, you know, okay, you know when you believe something, you know this, like you said earlier, I know this to be true. You will stand and defend that till you're blue in the face, until you're presented with new information even then you need to overcome your own ego to detach yourself from what was wrong and accept, maybe I was wrong about that scenario, maybe I was wrong about that situation. That also takes character.
Yes. Yes, and you know, the woke culture you mentioned earlier is only that the people who are woke, if I can use that word, it's only because they are unable, they lack the capability to engage in debate, discussion, argument, or even just ignore the nonsense. Sometimes it's just nonsense. And you have to have the character to ignore. There's a Taoist saying called Wu Wei, doing, not doing. Sometimes that takes the maximum character, right? So, for example, somebody on Hyde Park Corner stands up and he starts chanting racist slurs, right?
Yeah.
Now,
Which is allowed?
which is meant to be allowed in Hyde Park Corner,
Okay.
because that's the one corner by law where you can espouse anything you want, and you have the liberty to do so. Yeah.
Sure.
Okay. In that situation, I have choices. If I know better, by know I mean the Krishnamurti knowledge, then I have the ability, and if I have the ability to articulate, then I will argue with him.
Yeah.
Hopefully trying to convince him or her. However, actually, sometimes no matter how much rancor he causes in my mind, no matter how much unstable I become by listening to those horrific racist slurs thrown at the world, sometimes Wu Wei is the best way of dealing with him, because when he has no audience, he automatically tempers down. He or she automatically quietens down. But when you say, I will deplatform you, I will take your liberty away from saying your racist slurs, now you've just empowered them. And now you've just shown your lack of ability to deal with it.
Right.
That's my contention.
So if you stop and bark at every dog on your journey, you'll never get to your destination. It's important. And you got to pick your battles also.
Yeah, you got to pick your battles, and I think society has to be wise enough to recognize a racist slur for what it is, and somebody who is highlighting a genuine concern.
Yeah.
That takes wisdom.
Right.
It's not easy, but that's what we should be cultivating in our culture, in our society.
Oh, wow. Okay, but, people out there are far too triggered to listen to that advice. They might be annoyed by just what you've said there. How can I not respond to that guy or that girl saying those things?
No,
it's my duty to respond.
And absolutely it is their duty. And so they should. If they have the capability, they should.
And what you mean by capability is an actual argument, an actual set of...
Right, not shutting them down. Not saying, I will throw you in prison. Not saying, I will deplatform you because I don't like your views. That is not liberal. That is illiberal.
Okay, fantastic conversation here. Got to interject. You've been through this before. It's the rapid fire rounds. And, you've done it, right? So it should be easy for you now.
You'd think so, wouldn't you?
We hope so. Listen, Sachinji, you have the freedom, right? And
do I have the liberty?
This podcast gives you the liberty to answer as you please. Sachinji, what is the best piece of advice anybody has ever given you?
Oh, I think the best piece of advice my grandfather gave me, which was, when you wear a white shirt and mud gets splattered on you, if in that moment you react and you try and clean the mud off your shirt, your white shirt, you will only smudge the mud, and your shirt will become even darker, right? Even more dirtier. Instead, if you just wait for the mud to dry, it will just fall off by itself. And that advice in business, in life, in my career, really helped me. Really helped me.
That's pretty good. What would you rather do? Fight a horse-sized chicken or 10 chicken-sized horses?
Fight?
Fight.
Did you just say?
If you had to fight. If in front of you in the battleground there is a horse-sized chicken or 10 chicken-sized horses.
Has to be a horse-sized chicken.
Why?
Because I just think and I'm talking about this is a fight, right? So this is like it's going to eat me.
This is hypothetical.
Or I'm going to survive, right? So survival question, right?
Yeah.
All right. So I think my chances are much better dealing with one adversary than 10 little rascals at the same time. Because as a human being, I can focus on one thing better than I can focus on 10 things. Fine. And I'm a man, so that makes it even more limiting. So I'll focus on the one giant chicken, please.
Sure. No chickens or horses were harmed in the production of this podcast. If you could interview anybody in history, dead or alive, who would it be?
Alexis de Tocqueville.
Why?
So de Tocqueville was a French aristocratic sociologist, philosopher, who, ironically, I wrote a lot on during my studies, and he influenced my views and my ideas on liberty the most. And I find his work so compelling, Samiji. He wrote this book in 1958. If you read his book on Revolution, Society, Democracy, chapter 10, no, forget the rest of the book, just read chapter 10, everybody. It will be as if he is describing our world today. And he predicted where democracy would take society, how democracy would shape the human character, right? He wrote this in 1858. Or something in the 1850s anyway. But my point is that is truly phenomenal. Okay. So I would interview Alexis de Tocqueville.
And what would you ask him?
I would ask him how did he build his layers of insight from the observations that he made about democracy in the 1850s to then have a trajectory 200 years down the line and be so accurate. Like what was his cognition? What did he see that made him so, he was able to penetrate through the noise to get to the underlying essence of the nature of man, the nature of liberty, the nature of democracy. I mean just to sit at his feet, right? The Upanishads. I would like to have an Upanishad with Alexis de Tocqueville.
I'd ask him if he was truly free to write that book.
Good question as well.
Yeah. This will be an interesting question on the lines of democracy. If you were made, I don't know, PM or king or ruler of the land, what one law or principle would you bring into society?
As in, if I was an autocrat? As in, was I a dictator, or was I like a prime minister, like Mr. Johnson?
Like a fair society,
Okay, so like a democracy, right? It was like so liberal Britain.
Sure.
I become prime minister.
Okay, yeah. You become prime minister of Britain.
Yeah.
After Bojo.
Right.
Or whatever in the future. Yeah. What law or principle would you bring in?
I don't know about law, if that's okay. I don't know about law, but the principle that I would really, really push on is the idea of having a wholesome education, right? I would really dismantle the current education system. Like A to Z, I would dismantle it. Completely dismantle it. And I would rebuild it with the idea of the human being at the heart of it, where both character and skill sets are developed, not just in tandem, but also developed to the individual's capacity, right? Because every individual is different. And certainly I would not build human beings to serve an economy. The economy would bend around the individuals.
Sure.
Utopian? Maybe.
Yeah.
The future? Certainly.
Okay. I'll build it in the metaverse just for you. I'm sure we could do this till the end of time. So we'll ask you one last one before we end the rapid fire round. For our listeners at home, listening to this podcast right now, what's one thing they could take away that they could implement into their lives? What one thing could make them more sustainable or more wholesome or part of a flourishing state?
I think in the context of this podcast, I would say, really take time out every day to reflect on your own thoughts, right? Most of us have the exact same thoughts. About 80% of all of our thoughts today were exactly the same as yesterday and exactly the same as last week, right? So really take some time, even if it's 5 minutes, to reflect on one's own thoughts, one's own views, and to breathe, and just to kind of go, what I believe, is that even remotely correct? Like, how do I know that is correct? Let me just self-doubt. Have a healthy level of self-doubt without becoming pessimistic or not confident, right? But at least have a healthy amount of self-doubt and start with the premise, I don't know.
Ah, brilliant. I claim not to know anything.
And hence you are enlightened.
At least in the metaverse. Great philosophy there, Sachin. Thank you very much. We'll end the rapid fire round there and let's get back into the conversation. But just before we do, let's hear from somebody else on VM.
We hope you are enjoying this podcast so far. If you would like to help us to invest in ideas that matter, then why don't you become a well-wisher? All you have to do is sign up for our monthly donations via our website, which is vichaarmanthan.org. Become a well-wisher, support our work, and invest in ideas that matter. Thank you for listening.
Liberty and freedom. We've been having a great conversation with Dr. Sachin Nandha on the Vichaar Manthan podcast about liberty, about freedom, all things to do with democracy, and asking that question, are you free? Earlier on, Sachin, we talked about how in society we will trade our liberties for freedom. Why though? Why would we do that?
I think one of the things that happens in any human society is that, and one of the greatest ways in which power has always been usurped, power has always been centralized, right, by kings, by monarchs, or by dictators, or by prime ministers, or by senators, is by this notion that there is a fear that I will protect you from, or give me the power and I will make it more equal. I will make it more fair. And they will sell you these two things. One is a dark vision, which is of fear, the terrorism, the COVID, the migration, they will take your jobs stories. So one is true or not true, it doesn't matter, but they will sell you fear. And the other is they will sell you equality. Vote for me and I will make sure you are the same and you have the same things as that guy, the guy that you envy. And envy is a powerful force in a democracy, by the way, right? Which we can talk about. But politicians pander to our envy. And so they promise that I will make it all equal for you. Right?
So you're saying we want equality over liberty?
Yes, 100%. Most human beings will give up their liberty for equality.
Like what? Like we have, at least here in Britain, the National Health Service. I think that's fairly equal.
Well, is it? So I'll give you an example. So I am of Indian descent. Yeah? My biochemistry and my genetic structure is such that I have a propensity for certain diseases through old age.
It's all those chocolates
right?
you've been eating.
It's all those chocolates I've been eating. Right? Now, a white Caucasian male, because of his genetic structure, is going to have a different propensity for a different set of diseases.
Sure.
The NHS is completely geared to serve the majority.
Right.
Right? It's completely geared to serve the majority. So does it give me fair access to healthcare? No, it does not. That's just the nature of a socialist system. Right? So NHS does not have infinite money. It has a certain finite amount of resources and it has to allocate those resources. I am not making a moral claim. So I'm not talking about good or bad, right or wrong. I'm just telling a matter of fact that there are limited resources. NHS has to make decisions and it's usually channeled at the majority, which are white, Caucasian, in this case, say it's me and another male because I'm a male. So the Indian male, who is a minority, we're less than 2%, is going to have less access to certain needs that I will have that most other white males will never have because their genetic propensity is different to mine, but they will have more resources at their disposal than I will. Now, that's the way all socialist systems work, right? For example, you and I are able-bodied, yeah? we have far more access to public transport and public services than somebody who might be visually impaired, right? And that's not because the world is evil and the world is cruel. It's because there are finite resources. Somebody has to make decisions. And in any socialist system, the majority always win. You serve the majority first, especially in a democracy, because you're after votes. You're after pleasing the maximum number, right? So that you can get the maximum amount of votes and so you get back into power. So therefore, it does become a sense of majoritarianism in any socialist model. So that's why equality is often the thing that we will seek rather than... so I'll give you an example. In a democracy, there are often, in any liberal democracy, you will find that after a certain amount of time, there'll be very few poor people, right? In the society. There'll be very few rich people in the society. And the majority will be middle class. Those middle class have an abject fear of becoming poor because they're not that rich, and they have an absolute envy of those who are rich.
This is the not bad people. The people that don't have it bad. They're just
Correct.
in the middle. Just
You and I, Sumidji, right? We're not stupendously wealthy. We're not poor. But we can smell and we can see poverty, right? And we're not that far away from it. Vice versa. We can also taste success. We can also taste wealth and glory. We're not that far from it. So we have envy that drives us that way. We have fear that drives us that way.
status quo.
And equality, what does equality do? It does two things for me. It gives me security against poverty, and it satisfies my envy by bringing that rich so-and-so down a tag.
Tax the rich.
Tax the rich, eat the rich, knock the rich, right? Both of these tendencies are dark tendencies from a liberal perspective.
If the majority of people knew this stuff, would they not revolt?
Yes, but in a democracy, what happens, and you alluded to it earlier in our discussion, is that some sort of, de Tocqueville says this. De Tocqueville said that in a democracy, and now with enhanced technology, it's even faster, is that there will be a stability of public opinion. Take social media. Social media automatically, depending on the echo chamber you are part of, there will be a stability of opinion in all of your groups.
It's like hashtags.
It's like hashtags. Everybody follows the same thing. And if you dare to speak out, you're a traitor. You're a bigot. You can't say that. And there'll be this gasp of air and then there'll be a judgment call, right? Stone throwing. So in a democracy, the same thing constantly happens where public opinion has to become flatline. You all have to think the same thing. You all have to aspire for the same things. You all have to fear the same things. Right? This naturally happens in a democracy.
That's terrible. It sounds so dystopian.
Yes, and what happens because of that stability of opinion? You can't get revolutions. You can't get evolutions because you are all thinking the same thing in the same way, right? And what that does is, of course, we then give away our freedom and our liberty to powerful forces who promise us security and equality in the hope that that happens, which may not happen. But either way, we've given it away, and so you get power centralization, you get power concentration, right? So democracy actually has a habit of creating huge centers of power, right? In the hands of a few. Capitalism does the same thing. Now, we're not talking about capitalism, but it does the same thing. So a liberal democracy is always in danger if the public are not vigilant. If the public are not vigilant, we are always in danger of becoming a democratic despotism.
Okay.
Right? Where the few rule us under the guise of democracy.
This is the dark side of democracy. Some very salient points, and I definitely came into this podcast thinking I knew what liberty and freedom meant, but you've challenged. Hey man, I claim not to know, right? So we are ever learning, and I hope everyone listening to this podcast so far has learned something, or at least come away with more questions. I guess that's one of the aims of Vichaar Manthan in general, is to make you challenge your own beliefs, your own notions, all the subscriptions you've made to what you think is correct or right or wrong or bad, or insert emotion or conclusion here. Sachin, any parting thoughts? Anything that, if someone hasn't picked anything up from this podcast on liberty and freedom, what notions of freedom can you give to them?
First and foremost, can I just say, how much I welcome the opportunity to come and share my thoughts on this platform, right? Because I think what Vichaar Manthan seems to be doing is that you are creating some space within our liberal society to exercise your liberty, right? And I love that. I love the fact that you allow so many different types of people to come and express their thoughts in a sensible yet critical manner, right? So look, I've really enjoyed it, and thank you for having me on. The thing that I would say to our listeners is that the price we pay for liberty and freedom is eternal vigil. That's the price we have to pay. Right? That's the cost we have to bear. So what do I mean by vigil? From the Hindu dharmic perspective, we would call it a sadhana, right? A process which we have to struggle with in order to become better human beings. It is a struggle. There is no shortcut. There is no pleasure pill. There is no quick escape. There is no power you can just vote in and they'll sort your problems out for you. No. You have to take responsibility. Each individual has to take responsibility to protect our freedom and our liberty. And it is a sadhana. It is a struggle. What is that struggle? That struggle is not against the world. That struggle is against ourselves. How do I make myself more coherent, gentler, kinder, more compassionate, more thoughtful, more critical? That character building. When that happens, wisdom naturally spawns. And when wisdom spawns, freedom and liberty will be protected.
Very deep insights, and thank you, Sachin, for sharing them with us. I think humanity is quite fickle. It's quite a challenge that you put in front, but I do also come from the same thinking that the best I can do for you is be a better me. And that better me is one that works on my capacity, on my character, on my ability to respond to scenarios, challenges, situations, and challenge my own beliefs, things I've grown up with, whether that's culture, whether that's institutional society, politics, identity, all of these things that are presented to me. I, as an individual, must challenge them and keep rediscovering who I am and what I'm doing. And I think the point you alluded to there about VM and Vichaar Manthan. So for those that don't know, Vichar is the concept of ideas and thoughts, and a Manthan is the churning of those. So Vichaar Manthan is constantly looking to bring on speakers and commentators onto the platform to earnestly dissect ideas, look at notions of thought we have in society and see if they stand the test. See if they can stand up to the test of being a flourishing idea or one that helps all of those around us. Heat, meet, breathe, for anyone that's tuned in before. So to all the listeners at home, thank you for joining in. And I just leave you with one question. Are you free? This was another episode of the Vichaar Manthan podcast on liberty and freedom. Tune in next time. Namaste.